What was a wedding night really like in the Wild West? 1 in 8 frontier women died in childbirth. Think about that number. For every 8 women who married on the American frontier, one would die screaming in a dirt floor cabin with no medical help, bleeding out while her husband stood helpless, and her children listened through paper-thin walls. And this isn't the shocking part. The shocking part is that every single one of those women knew this statistic before their wedding night. They walked into marriage knowing they were playing Russian roulette with their own lives, because on the frontier, marriage wasn't about love. It was about not dying alone. Hollywood sold you a lie. Every Western romance you've ever watched showed you the frontier wedding, the beautiful bride in white, the handsome cowboy, the sunset kiss, the happily ever after. They never showed you the 15-year-old mail-order bride meeting her 50-year-old husband for the first time at a train depot, realizing he'd lied about everything in his letters. They never showed you the wedding night in a one-room sod house with dirt floors while the husband's children from his first wife, the one who died in childbirth, slept 3 feet away. They never showed you what happened when "till death do us part" meant you were legally trapped with a violent man in a place where the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away and the sheriff wouldn't intervene in domestic matters. Today, we're pulling back that curtain. We're walking through a frontier marriage from the wedding night, through the brutal years that followed, and by the end, you'll understand why frontier wives aged faster, died younger, and suffered in silence more than any other group in American history. Because this isn't a love story, this is a survival story, and survival on the frontier extracted a price that was paid almost entirely in women's bodies, women's labor, and women's lives. The wedding night, when strangers became spouses. Sarah steps off the train in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory, 1876. She's 17. She's traveled 800 miles from Ohio because a man named Jacob posted an advertisement seeking a wife. They've exchanged 4 letters. She knows he's a homesteader with a claim 40 miles north of town. She knows he's 38. What she doesn't know until this moment, watching him approach across the platform, is that he's missing most of his teeth, that the established ranch he described is a sod house, or that the wagon waiting to take them to his claim contains 2 children from his previous marriage, ages 4 and 6. Staring at her with hollow, hungry eyes, they marry that afternoon. A circuit preacher, 5 minutes, no ceremony. By nightfall, they're at the homestead. The house is cut into a hillside. Sod bricks, chunks of prairie held together by grass roots, form 3 walls. The 4th is the hill itself, dirt and rock. The roof is more sod laid over cottonwood branches. When it rains, mud drips through. The floor is packed earth. One room, maybe 12 feet by 14, a cast iron stove in one corner, a table made from planks, 2 rope beds, one for Jacob and Sarah, one for the children. No separation, no privacy, no doors between them. This is where the wedding night happens. The smell hits first. Unwashed bodies. Jacob's been working the claim for weeks without bathing. The children smell like the sour milk and lye soap that passes for washing. Kerosene from the lamp. Smoke from the stove that doesn't draft properly. Mouse droppings in the corners. The musty, damp odor of earth walls. Sarah's been traveling for 3 days. Her own smell mingles with the rest. The sound is worse. Wind screaming across the prairie, battering the sod walls. Mice rustling in the grass root thatch overhead. The 4-year-old coughing, a wet, rattling sound. The rope bed creaking as Jacob sits down to remove his boots. Sarah stands frozen near the stove because there's nowhere else to stand, nowhere private to undress, nowhere to escape to. She's wearing every piece of clothing she owns, the travel dress, the petticoats, the corset, the chemise, because it's October and the sod house is barely warmer than outside. Jacob doesn't speak, neither does she. They're strangers. She knows nothing about what's expected of her tonight, beyond whispered fragments from her mother, delivered in shame the morning she left. Submit to your husband. It's your duty. It hurts the first time. Pray it's quick. She undresses behind a blanket Jacob hangs from a roof beam. The children watch the shadows her body casts against the fabric. She can hear them breathing. She climbs into the rope bed wearing her chemise because removing it in front of this stranger is unthinkable. The mattress is a ticking sack filled with straw. It crackles. It smells like mildew and dirt. The wool blanket is scratchy and too thin. Jacob blows out the lamp. Darkness, but not silence. Never silence on the frontier. What happens next happens while the wind howls, while the children lie awake in their bed 3 feet away, while Sarah stares at the dirt ceiling and understands that this is now her life. There is no romance here. There is duty and survival, and the grinding reality that she signed a legal contract, marriage, that gives this stranger ownership of her body, her labor, and any children that result. The first months, the labor trap. Sarah wakes at 4 in the morning because the fire has died and the house is freezing. This is her job now. She fumbles in darkness, relights the stove with shaking hands, waits for heat that comes too slowly. By the time Jacob and the children wake at 5, she needs breakfast ready. Cornmeal mush, salt pork, coffee if they have it. The water barrel is empty. It's always empty. The creek is a quarter mile away, down a muddy slope. Sarah makes the trip 4 times before noon, hauling 2 wooden buckets that weigh 30 pounds each when full. Her shoulders scream, her hands blister. This is just for drinking, cooking, and washing dishes. There's no water left for bathing, for laundry, for the luxury of cleanliness. Jacob works the claim, breaking sod, planting wheat, building fences from rocks he digs out of the earth. He leaves at dawn, returns at dusk. Sarah works too. Her day is a brutal cycle. Hauling water, cooking, washing dishes in water so precious, she reuses it 3 times, tending the pathetic vegetable garden that struggles in soil better suited to grass, mending clothes by hand because every piece of fabric is irreplaceable, churning butter, making soap from wood ash and bacon grease, in a process that leaves her hands burned and raw, caring for Jacob's children who regard her with suspicion and grief for their dead mother. There is no one to talk to. The nearest homestead is 5 miles east. Sarah has not spoken to another woman since leaving Cheyenne 6 weeks ago. The silence is crushing. The isolation eats at her mind. At night, when Jacob wants her body, she submits because refusing isn't an option. Coverture law means she ceased to exist as a legal person the moment they married. Everything she is belongs to him now. Her labor, her body, her future. She writes letters home describing a cozy house and good neighbors and happiness because admitting the truth would shame her family and change nothing. The West was supposed to be opportunity. It's supposed to be freedom. Instead, Sarah is trapped in a sod house on an empty prairie, working 16-hour days in conditions that would break a mule, married to a stranger who uses her body and expects her labor and offers nothing resembling partnership or tenderness. By December, she's pregnant. She knows because her monthly bleeding stopped and nausea wakes her before the cold does. She tells Jacob. He nods, says nothing, returns to his breakfast. Children mean more workers for the claim. That's the calculation. Sarah knows something else. She knows the statistics. She's heard the stories. Mary Peterson, 2 claims over, died last spring hemorrhaging after a breech birth. Anna Mueller made it through the birth but died 3 days later from infection. Susan Wright survived, but her baby didn't, born blue and still, buried in a shallow grave behind the house. Sarah is 17 years old, and she knows there's a real chance she won't live to see 18. The pregnancy trap. No escape. Pregnancy on the frontier doesn't mean rest. It means continuing the same brutal labor while your body transforms into something you don't recognize. Sarah still hauls water at 5 months pregnant, the weight of the bucket straining her back, the walk to the creek leaving her breathless. She still cooks over a hot stove in July when temperatures hit 105 degrees, sweat soaking through every layer of clothing she can't remove. She still scrubs laundry on a washboard until her knuckles bleed, still bends to tend the garden, still lifts Jacob's children when they're sick or scared. Her body aches in new ways. Her feet swell. Her back screams. She can't sleep because the rope bed is too uncomfortable, and the baby kicks, and there's no position that doesn't hurt. Jacob doesn't adjust his expectations. The work still needs doing. The family still needs feeding. Sarah's physical state is irrelevant to the demands of survival. At 7 months, she feels the first contractions. False labor, probably, but panic floods through her because she's alone. Jacob is in town, a day's wagon ride away. purchasing
Help might
seed.
not
The
come.
children are too young to help.
I must
The
do
nearest
this
woman is
alone.
5 miles away across empty prairie. Sarah breathes through the
shouldn't be out
contractions,
here,
prays
child.
they stop,
It
and they
hurts,
do.
Mama.
But now she
I know,
knows.
dear one,
When
just
real
hold
labor
on.
starts, she might be alone. There might be no help coming. The frontier has no hospitals, no doctors within a day's ride. Midwives exist in towns, but homesteaders can't afford to pay for one to stay for days waiting for labor to begin. Most frontier women give birth attended only by their husbands, men who know nothing about childbirth beyond what they've seen with livestock, or entirely alone. Sarah's labor begins on a Tuesday morning in February. Contractions wake her at dawn. They're close together immediately. This baby is coming fast. Jacob sends the children to the neighbors, hitches the wagon, and drives like hell toward town to fetch the midwife. Sarah labors alone in the sod house for 6 hours before he returns. The midwife is 60 years old and has delivered maybe 40 babies. She's not a trained medical professional. She's just a woman who's done this enough times to have some idea what to expect. She washes her hands in the water Sarah boiled. But there's no way to truly sterilize anything. The bed, the room, the air itself is contaminated with dirt, dust, and bacteria. The pain is beyond anything Sarah imagined. It's not like menstrual cramps. It's like being ripped apart from the inside. Contractions come in waves that leave her screaming, gasping, begging for it to stop. There is no pain relief, no epidural, no medication. The midwife offers whiskey. Sarah drinks it and vomits. 12 hours into labor, something goes wrong. The baby is breech, feet first instead of head first. The midwife tries to turn it. Sarah screams. Blood soaks the sheets. The midwife's face goes gray. She's seen this before. She knows how it ends. But Sarah is young and strong and stubborn, and after 16 hours of labor that turns the sod house into a scene from a nightmare, blood and screaming and the smell of sweat and fear, the baby comes. A boy, alive, crying. Sarah hemorrhages for 2 days. She nearly dies. The midwife stays, packing rags between her legs, changing them when they soak through, praying the bleeding stops. It does eventually. Sarah survives. She's one of the 7, not the 1. But survival means something different on the frontier. 5 days after giving birth, Sarah is back at the stove cooking breakfast. A week later, she's hauling water again. Her body hasn't healed. She's still bleeding, still torn, still weak. But the work doesn't stop. Jacob needs to eat. The children need care. The baby needs nursing. Sarah's physical state is irrelevant. This is frontier motherhood. No recovery period, no help, no acknowledgement that you just endured something that nearly killed you. You survived childbirth and immediately return to the same brutal labor that will probably result in another pregnancy within a year. The trap tightens. Systems of control. What Sarah doesn't fully understand yet, what takes years of frontier marriage to comprehend, is that her suffering isn't accidental. It's built into every legal, economic, and social system governing frontier life. Legally, Sarah stopped existing the moment she married. Coverture laws, imported from English common law and enthusiastically enforced on the American frontier, meant that married women had no legal identity separate from their husbands. Sarah can't own property. The homestead claim is in Jacob's name only, even though her labor is essential to proving it up. She can't sign contracts. She can't keep any earnings if she somehow found paid work. If Jacob dies, she doesn't automatically inherit the claim. His children from his first marriage might have better legal standing. And if Jacob beats her, if he comes home drunk and violent, if he breaks her ribs or blackens her eyes, or worse, there is no legal recourse. Marital rape doesn't exist as a legal concept. A wife's body belongs to her husband by law. Domestic violence is considered a family matter. The sheriff, if you could even reach him across 40 miles of prairie, would tell you to go home and be a better wife. Judges openly cited the rule of thumb. A man could legally beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb. Divorce is theoretically possible, but practically impossible. The social stigma alone would destroy Sarah. A divorced woman is considered morally ruined, unemployable, unmarriageable. Churches would shun her. Her own family might disown her. And economically, divorce means destitution. Sarah owns nothing. She has no job skills that translate to wages. She has a baby. Where would she go? How would she survive? This is the trap. Marriage on the frontier isn't a choice that can be unmade. It's a permanent condition that women enter knowing escape is nearly impossible. You endure or you die. Those are the options. The economic trap is even more insidious. The Homestead Act, sold as democratic opportunity, a chance for any family to own land, actually created a system that forced marriages. To prove up a homestead, you needed to improve the land, build a dwelling, and farm continuously for 5 years. A single person could do this, but married couples had advantages. 2 workers, faster improvements, better survival rates. This created a frontier marriage market where unions formed not from love, but from pure economic calculation. Mail-order bride arrangements flourished because of this calculation. Men needed women's labor, cooking, preserving food, making clothes, caring for children, tending gardens, to make homesteading viable. Women needed men's legal ability to own land and their physical strength for heavy field work. Romance was irrelevant. Compatibility was a luxury. You married for survival. The result was exactly what Sarah experienced. Strangers binding themselves legally to each other, discovering incompatibility or worse, and having no exit. Widows remarried within weeks of their husbands' deaths, not from callousness, but from desperate economic need. Without a husband, a frontier woman couldn't maintain a claim, couldn't protect herself, couldn't survive. So she married the next man who asked, regardless of whether he'd courted her first husband's land or actually wanted her. The slow destruction. 5 years into her marriage, Sarah is 22 years old and has 3 children. She's pregnant with her 4th. Her body is destroyed. Constant pregnancy and labor have left her with prolapsed organs, hemorrhoids, torn pelvic muscles that cause chronic pain. Her hands are gnarled from hauling water and lye soap burns. Her back is permanently damaged from lifting children and water buckets while pregnant. Her teeth are rotting because there's no dentist within 100 miles and no money for one, if there were. She looks 40. Photographs from this era show frontier wives at 35 looking 60, faces lined, eyes hollow, bodies bent. This wasn't metaphor. This was the physical reality of 16-hour workdays, constant pregnancy, inadequate nutrition, and accumulating injury with no medical care. The mental toll is worse. Sarah hasn't had a real conversation with another woman in months. The isolation is suffocating. She talks to the children, but they're too young for adult conversation. She talks to Jacob, but he's exhausted and increasingly bitter as drought threatens the wheat crop and debt mounts. Frontier records document prairie madness. Women on remote homesteads going insane from loneliness, hearing voices, seeing things, eventually requiring commitment to asylums. Sarah isn't there yet, but she understands how women arrive at that point. Depression settles over her like a heavy blanket. She wakes up tired. She goes to bed exhausted. The work never ends, and it never changes. And there's no hope of it ever being different. This is her life until she dies in childbirth, or from disease, or from simple exhaustion. She's 22 years old and she has no future that doesn't look exactly like the present. Jacob, meanwhile, is changing too. The frontier breaks men differently, but just as thoroughly. 3 years of failed wheat crops. Debt to the grain merchants. The claim that was supposed to make them prosperous has made them poor. He drinks more. His temper is shorter. The violence, when it comes, isn't shocking. Sarah's been expecting it. A shove, a slap, a fist when he's drunk and angry about circumstances neither of them can control. She has nowhere to go. The sheriff won't help. The church says wives must submit. Her family is in Ohio and wouldn't take her back anyway. She made her choice when she married. So she endures. She keeps her head down. She tries to avoid triggering his rage. This is survival too. The children grow up watching this. The oldest boy learns that men's anger is women's problem. The daughter learns that suffering in silence is what women do. The patterns repeat, transmitted from one generation to the next, normalized and inescapable. And Sarah keeps getting pregnant because birth control doesn't exist. Because Jacob exercises his legal right to her body, regardless of whether she's recovered from the last birth. Because endless pregnancy is simply the condition of being a married frontier woman. 8 children, 10, 12. Each pregnancy risks her life. Each birth damages her body further. Each baby she manages to keep alive demands more labor she doesn't have the strength to give. This is frontier marriage in its full reality, a system designed to extract every ounce of labor and life from women's bodies until those bodies break completely. So next time you watch a romantic western where the cowboy gets the girl and they ride off into the sunset together, remember Sarah. Remember that the sunset led to a sod house with dirt floors where a 17-year-old stranger submitted to a man she'd met hours before while his children listened through the darkness. Remember that happily ever after meant a 1 in 8 chance of dying in childbirth, meant 16-hour workdays, meant legal powerlessness, meant enduring violence with no recourse, meant aging decades in years. The rights we take for granted now, the ability to own property, to divorce, to have legal protection from violence, to control our own reproduction, to exist as legal persons separate from our spouses, these are shockingly recent. Women couldn't get credit cards in their own names until 1974. Marital rape wasn't illegal in all 50 states until 1993. The systems that trapped Sarah existed in various forms well into the 20th century. And globally, millions of women still live in Sarah's reality, married as children to older men, trapped by economic dependence, suffering violence with no legal recourse, dying in childbirth because medical care doesn't exist. The frontier wasn't exceptional. It was just honest about conditions that persist. If this shattered your image of Old West romance, hit that like button, subscribe for more historically accurate looks at frontier life that Hollywood won't show you, and drop a comment. What shocked you most about frontier marriage? The lack of privacy on the wedding night? The 1 in 8 childbirth mortality? The legal powerlessness? Let me know below, because we've only scratched the surface of what frontier women endured. There's so much more history to uncover.